Okay, Boker Tov, everybody, or Erev Tov, depending on where you might be located. It's a pleasure to welcome Dafna Siegman to, I don't, you've not taught for us on Zoom, as far as I can recall. And it's really a pleasure to welcome her. Dafna grew up in Silver Spring, as you may have heard, been living in Israel for a long time. I don't know exactly how many years, but I know she taught at Nishmat for over 20 years. So she's living in Israel at least 20 years. And she now works at the National Library, the beautiful new National Library in Jerusalem, graduate of Columbia University. And it's a pleasure to welcome her to Torah in Motion. And we're going to start backwards with Gadya. And then Rabbi Shulman will be speaking today at 1 o'clock on the rabbis in Bnei Brak. And then, of course, every day continuing through up till Pesach, every day at 11 and 1. So, Vakashat Dafna, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Nice to be here. I think I taught in the pre-Zoom days when we actually flew to Toronto for in-person classes, if we can imagine such a concept. So there we go. Amazing, though, that you've built such an empire. So it's an honor to be here. And as I said, we just said, we'll start from the back. So Chad Gadya, right? The whole back end part of the Haggadah, right, what we call Nirtzah, is a relatively late addition to the Haggadah. The main part of our Haggadah is from the Mishnah on Masachet Psachim. And then we have texts of the full Nusach of Magid from the Rambam, from other middle-aged sources. And it's only later, we're talking 16th century and on, that we meet all of the piyutim of the Nirtzah section of the Haggadah. So we're starting with the Chad Gadya tonight, or tonight here in Israel, this afternoon for you. But it's important just to keep the framing that the whole Nirtzah section is really a later addition. And we've already fulfilled in the Seder all of our halachic obligations of the night, right? The 4 cups of wine, the matzah, the maror, the combination sandwich of the matzah and maror, whichever level of rabbinic obligation there is for that. We've had our festive meal. We've said the Hallel. Right? So our official Seder is really over. We've concluded our halachic obligations of the Seder. And of course, the main part of the evening, the Magid, telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, we've done par excellence. The Nirtzah section of piyutim, of liturgical poems, of songs, right, comes as a later closing to the evening, likely aimed at inspiring and leaving the participants of the Seder with, right, an uplifting feeling and perhaps even something a little more participatory. The poem, the song that we'll focus on today, the Chad Gadya, appears for the first time in print in the 16th century. It appears in the famous Prague Haggadah. There is a 14th century manuscript from Provence. If you go to the National Library of Israel's Ktiv website, where we have copies of manuscripts both in our collection and in libraries around the world, you'll see that there's a manuscript in the Bibliothèque in Paris that was scanned, pretty poor scan on the website. And in that 14th century handwritten Haggadah from Provence, there we have pretty much the full text of Chad Gadya, some important changes that I'll mention later. And what scholars speculate is that from that handwritten manuscript, right, then we have this blank until the 16th century where we meet Chad Gadya in print in the Prague Haggadah, and then from afterwards, we continue meeting it in print. Scholars think that if it was in the 14th century in Provence and Spain have very, very strong connections, then, right, maybe it got lost in the traditions of the Spanish expulsion, we're not sure. But right, we know that it finds its way into Central and Eastern Europe by the 16th century. And from that point on, it's a central part of the Ashkenazi Haggadah. What's interesting, though, is when we try to talk about its origins, scholars can point to tens of songs that are very, very similar folk songs in numerous countries, non-Jewish songs, that have a very, very similar ring. They're what are called cumulative songs, right? That we add something as we build the song. Some of us, something like the house that Jack built, 12 Days of Christmas in English, and then you name the variant. There are variants in every language and every culture. And some scholars have done their best to try to show that they found the oldest such song, and maybe Chad Gadya is based on that, but not sure that we'll ever be able to really know if it's based on a particular song or if it's just a genre. It's interesting to note that we sing the song in which language? It's sung in Aramaic. Chad Gadya means Gdi Echad, right? It's not in Hebrew. But it's not perfectly in Aramaic. First of all, there are a lot of Aramaic grammatical errors in the song. Plus, there are some Hebrew words like Hakadosh Baruch Hu, not Kuchabrichu, right? Like Malach Hamavet, right? There are Aramaic ways to say that. So the fact that it's this kind of mishmash of imperfect Aramaic and a little bit of Hebrew also tips off scholars that obviously this song is not some ancient Aramaic song, right, from the period of Chazal, in which the Talmud was written, right, from a period in which people really spoke Aramaic. This is a song that's written some point later. It's written in this not perfect Aramaic, probably to give it some kind of, I don't know, sign of ancientness and hoariness, right? Some kind of authority and association. So again, I don't think we'll ever know exactly where the song comes from. What I'd like to focus on tonight are what are the central themes of this very well-known song? And what closing messages can it leave us with for our Seder? The first source that I brought, and I have to apologize, the source sheet is in what's called landscape, right? In the word formatting, because of the chart, which is long. But I'm sorry I hope it shows up okay on the screen, since it's not, it's long across the page. In the first source, I brought a curious tshuva from the Chida, famous sage, not from Ashkenaz, late 18th century, early 19th century. And he was asked a question, a real halachic question, saying that he heard about somebody who made fun of this song, Chad Gadya, which Ashkenazim sing on Pesach. And can you imagine? The community put him into excommunication. Right? They actually treated him as a heretic because he mocked this song, right? And if you know the words of the song, right, you'd have to wonder, is it really all that heretical to kind of laugh at Chad Gadya, right? Or to say, Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem, kind of like ask the Rasha's question about Chad Gadya and say, all right, what's so important about Chad Gadya? So that's the question that was posed to the Chida. Right? The question was, tell me, right, this excommunication, this ban on somebody who made fun of Chad Gadya, is that really is there any weight to it? Maybe it's a little exaggerated. And in his answer here, he actually, and I'm purposely not reading line by line, I'm giving a brief summary. He answers that yes, it's a really important song. Every word he says, right, in this song has meaning. And yes, it's not from my community's traditions, right? It's from Ashkenazim, but, right, this is a song that has great, great meaning. He even says that he saw from a scholar that he has great respect for, that there are more than 10 explanations for this song, and they range both Kabbalistic explanations and Midrashic explanations and Pshat-based explanations. And he draws the conclusion in the final line and a half, Ve'en safek, I have no doubt, ki lo davar reku. I have no doubt that this song is not empty or meaningless. Of course, that's a phrase from the end of Sefer Dvarim, which is the description of the whole Torah. Right? Moshe admonishes us at the end of Sefer Dvarim regarding the Torah, ki lo davar reku mikem, that the Torah is not meaningless, that every word and every letter has meaning. So the Chida borrows that phrase, which we know is applied to the Torah, and says regarding the song of Chad Gadya, it's really full of meaning, and you can have multiple meanings. And then he says, and in general, in the last sentence, he says, so many of the Ashkenazi piyutim, liturgical poems, have so much meaning because many of them are based on the Kabbalah, the mystical teachings of the Ari Kadosh of Rav Yitzchak Luria from the 16th century. So now that's just an interesting tshuva, an interesting response to be asked. First of all, right, it doesn't ask me about my practice of halacha, it asks me about my attitude, right? It's a discussion of somebody's attitude and ideology when it comes to how to look at something that is not core liturgy, right? This is not the Shema, this is not the Amidah. Right? This is a poem that's appended to the Haggadah, relatively newfangled by the time this question's asked. And the Chidah's answer is very, very strong. Of course they were right in excommunicating this guy and putting on the formal bans of heresy because this poem has a lot of powerful religious messages, right? And this poem, like so many other poems, may be infused with mystical meanings, and it's very, very deep and profound. And in his answer, the Chidah alludes to the fact that there are multiple meanings and interpretations to this poem. So my goal for tonight's shir is to be able to plunge into some of these meanings and try to at least give different people some message to close their Seder with. I don't think every meaning will appeal to everybody. I'm not going to try to bring 10. I'll propose a few. Before we get to the meanings, it's interesting that there are many scholars and commentators to the Haggadah who try to show that, yes, this folk song style song, this cumulative song that we keep adding as the song goes along, may have sources in rabbinic literature, and that those sources may also be able to teach us something about the message of the song. In his Haggadah, at the turn of the century, previous century, Rav Menachem Kasher, suggested in Haggadah Shlema, in source number 2, he brings 3 rabbinic sources that might possibly be the source for this song, or at least for the messages that the song of Chad Gadya has. In the first one, he brings the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, also in Aramaic, and it's a powerful Mishnah, right? It's a Mishnah that says, right, it speaks about they saw a skull floating on the water, and, right, I'll read the full Mishnah, right? They saw the skull floating on the water. This is a Mishnah taught in the name of Rabban Gamliel, I think. And the skull is floating on the water. Amarla, and he says to the skull, Al de'ateft atfuch. Because you drowned somebody, you also were drowned. V'sof mitafayich yetufun. And those who drowned you will also be drowned. The message of that Mishnah in Pirkei Avot is that, you're right, says Rav Kasher, even though they did not intend to do you any harm, right, and some just evil person drowned you, Mr. Skull, that he sees, similarly, the cat, but yet the Mishnah says, the one who drowned you will also be punished for their evil actions. Similarly, in Chad Gadya, says Rav Kasher in the second line here, Kach hashunra, similarly the cat, Re'uya hayta omnam le'onesh al torpat hagdi. The cat really deserves a punishment for gobbling up the gdi, the goat. Avalo l'chach nitkaven hakelep. But when the dog comes and bites the cat, the dog doesn't understand that it's actually meting out justice in this big global picture, right? He's just a mean dog, a vicious dog who bites the cat. But therefore, ulachen af huluke. But because he's just plain old mean and starts up with the cat, that's why the dog deserves to be punished in the next stanza of the song, v'chen hala, right? And then why does the next item and the next item, right, the stick and the water, why do they each deserve to be punished? Because they're just being plain evil. They're not coming to try to settle bigger accounts. They're just being completely evil, like that skull that we see floating in the water, right? And the message of the Mishnah is, whoever murdered you, they're also going to be punished, because even if they, right, they didn't realize that they're part of some bigger chain of divine punishment, right, or of divine workings out of evening out the score, because they acted with just pure evil motivations, they deserve to be punished. And he quotes a pasuk from Kohelet, Ki gavoa me'al gavoa shomer ugvohim alehem, speaking about God, that God is like this higher up watchman who's watching very, very, very closely everything that's going on down below. But then, right, how does the song of Chad Gadya end? The last verse has God coming and slaughtering the Malach HaMavet. And that will bring, says Rav Kasher, Yasir Dima Me'al Kol Panim. That will bring the end of tears and of pain to everybody, because now that the Malach HaMavet will be wiped out, then, right, there's no more evil left in the world. Then we're done with having to settle all the scores from the cat and the goat at the beginning of the song. So Rav Kasher's first potential rabbinic source for the theme of Chad Gadya is this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot and that pasuk in Tehillim and the pasuk in Kohelet, which suggests that Hashem has this bigger plan for how he metes out justice in the world. And the song is a song about the punishment of all of the evil doers throughout history, but that history will ultimately come to a time when evil will be eradicated, when God will figuratively and literally wipe out the Malach HaMavet and end the evil in the world. In the second part, the Rav Kasher suggests another rabbinic source that might be the basis for both the structure and the themes of Chad Gadya. He quotes a midrash in Aramaic from Breshit Rabbah, in which Nimrod, back in Mesopotamia, in Haran, before Avraham leaves to Canaan, right, in the time when Avraham is the brazen monotheist in town, right, the one who says that he doesn't believe in all of the idolatry that everybody else is practicing, and Nimrod threatens to throw him into the fiery furnace, right? And so in the midrash, right, it's a midrash also in Aramaic, where Nimrod says to Avraham, let's worship fire, to which Nimrod is clearly trying to polemicize and argue with Avraham and convince him that all of the different gods that are worshipped there are truer than the God Hashem that Avraham has found. So Nimrod says to Avraham, let's worship the fire, to which Avraham says, no, let's worship water, because water can put out the fire, to which Nimrod says, okay, fine, so let's worship the water. But then Avraham says, okay, but if according to your logic, we should really worship the cloud, because it's the cloud that brings us the water. To which Nimrod says, Niskod la'anana, fine, so we'll worship the cloud. To which Avraham says, no, Nimrod, then maybe we should really worship the wind, because the wind can disperse the clouds, break up the clouds. To which Nimrod says, fine, we'll worship the wind. And then Avraham says, maybe we should just worship human beings, because they can withstand wind, right? They don't get knocked down when the wind comes, right? So here's a midrash with, right, one thing leading to the other to the other. And the message of Avraham to Nimrod is that, your logic, right, and your theology is pretty flawed. And perhaps, right, that style midrash is also behind the Chad Gadya. And then Rav Kasher suggests that there could be a third source, and this one I brought you in English as well, right? That there are it's a braita in Masachet Bava Batra, that there are 10 strong things in the world. Rock is strong, but iron can break it. Iron is strong, but fire melts it. Fire is strong, but water extinguishes it. Water is strong, but the clouds carry it. The clouds are strong, but the wind drives them. The wind is strong, but man withstands it. Man is strong, but fear weakens him. Fear is strong, but wine removes it. Just get drunk and you won't be so afraid. Wine is strong, but sleep overcomes it. Sleep is strong, but death stands over it, right? At the end of the line, right, death can wipe out all of the powers of sleep, of wine, of fear, of wind, of man, of wind. What is stronger than death? And they quote the pasuk from Mishlei, tzedakah tatzil mimavet. Right, that acts of kindness and tzedakah, that can protect you from death. What Rav Kasher tries to show us by finding these three sources is that the style of Chad Gadya, and perhaps some of the messages, do have roots in rabbinic sources, right? But of course, they are not the basis for Chad Gadya. So what we'll try to do is look at a few of the many, many interpretations. So the Chida in source number 1 said he heard from some sage that there are at least 10, right? I can tell you that in the Rav Kasher Haggadah and Haggadah Shlema, you can find more than 10. And if you keep opening up many more Haggadot and websites, you'll probably get up to, I don't know, 20 different interpretations. There's a degree of overlap in between them. I brought you an assortment here on the chart of 17th, 18th, 19th, earlier 20th century interpretations, 4 interpretations of many. And then on the next 2 pages, I brought you for bonus reading, I think Seder enjoyment, 2 pages from Rav Sachs's Haggadah. He appends a little essay in his Haggadah called One Goat, in which he offers a number of different readings of Chad Gadya, and I think many of them are very meaningful. And again, there's a degree of overlap between the different interpretations. So if we look in the first of the interpretations here, that of Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz, late 17th century, mostly 18th century, died in 1764. He reads the song historically, as do many other interpretations. Right? If you look in both the second and the third column, both Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz and the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, they both read the song historically. That each of the characters and elements in the Chad Gadya story who come and eradicate the previous one or destroy the previous one and then themselves are wiped out, each one represents a different time in history, in Jewish history. But right, these 2 historical readings tell different stories. So let's first look at the reading of Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz. He sees the main character of the song, the Chad Gadya, the one little goat with the one little kid that my father bought for 2 zuzim. He sees the goat as referring to Bnei Israel. And the father is Avraham Avinu, our forefather, our patriarch par excellence. And Avraham Avinu kind of bought or earned Bnei Israel through 2 traits, through 2 coins that he put down, the 2 zuzim. And that is the traits of chesed and rachamim. Avraham instilled, right, these special traits in his descendants. But then, who comes and starts up with the Gdi, right? Who comes and starts up with Bnei Israel? The Shunra, the cat. Those are the Egyptians, he says. We suffered in Egypt, and then we were redeemed. But then came the dog, the kalba, to start up with the shunra. That who's next in line. Now, again, the analogy here, as you'll figure out, right, is not going to be perfect, right? In our telling of the story in Shmot Perek Yud Zayin, Amalek, the dog, starts up with whom? Not the cat. Right? He doesn't start up with the Egyptians. Amalek comes and attacks Bnei Israel. So again, the reading here has each element in the narrative of Jewish history unfolding, but it's a little bit asynchronous, right? We would say that each of these players come and each time back attack the Gadya, Bnei Israel. We're the constant here. So that it's less the emphasis on Amalek attacking the Egyptians because they didn't, right? But it's that Amalek followed the Egyptians and they too then attacked Am Yisrael. And then comes the stick. Which stick is involved in hitting our enemies or smiting Amalek? That's Moshe's staff. And then he skips a lot of Jewish history. Reading of Jewish history is quite interesting. And he gets to the fire that burns the stick. The fire, he says, is the fire of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, of the first temple. But then comes the water, then comes a little bit of relief that puts out the fire. That's the Persian Empire, because under the Persian Empire, with Cyrus's declaration, the Jewish people are allowed to go back and begin to rebuild. So it's as if it's like a little bit of a respite. But then comes the ox, right, and gets rid of the fire. I'm sorry, and gets rid of the water. The ox, he says, is Yavan, is the Greek Empire. And then comes Herod at the end of the Greek Empire. He's the Shochet. And next in line are Titus and Rome. They are Malach HaMavet par excellence, the angel of death par excellence. But, right, if you hold out long enough in the saga of Jewish history, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the guise of the Mashiach, will come and knock off the Malach HaMavet, the Roman Empire, and bring peace. So it's a historical tale. It's not 100% accurate historical tale, but you kind of have to keep reading back the Gadya, the goat, right, as the victim in each case. And, right, there's a big leap from Yetziat Mitzrayim to the destruction of the first temple. Okay, I see Asher suggesting a comment about Amalek. Interesting. Okay, interesting. But certainly in the Torah's tale, right, it's clear that Amalek attacks Am Yisrael, and we have a mitzvah of wiping out Amalek. But
They're on the way to Mitzrayim, and they take over Mitzrayim, take over during the vacuum, and you don't hear anything during the entire period of the Shoftim. Is Mitzrayim, that was the great power of the world, mentioned at all in Yehoshua and Shoftim? Not a word.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Again, it's interesting, though, his leap till the destruction of the first temple. The second suggestion, those interpretations here by the Vilna Gaon, right, the Gra, also reads the song of Chad Gadya as a historical description, describing different periods of Jewish history. But here, the centerpiece is not about what happens and who attacks Am Yisrael, but it's about the fate of the Gedi, of the goat, which is the symbol for the Beit HaMikdash, of all of the sacrifices. So what happens to our Beit HaMikdash? Well, first there's the Abba, who buys the Gedi for 2 zuzim. That, he says, is David HaMelech, who purchased for good money, like Goren Arvana Yevusi, the threshing floor of Arvana, of the tribe of the Yevusi, the Jebusite, which that spot became the site on which the Beit HaMikdash would be built. So the Beit HaMikdash was purchased, right, by the site for the Beit HaMikdash was purchased by King David for 2 zuzim, for some money. But then came the cat and destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. That's Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, who destroys the first Beit HaMikdash. But then comes the dog, who bites the cat, right, who attacks the Babylonians, and that's Cyrus and the Persian Empire. And then the Persian Empire falls to the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire, we have a moment of fire. We have the story of the Chashmonaim, the candles in the temple that burnt for 8 days. Right? We have the rise and fall of empires, but we have that moment of Jewish light in the middle of the Chashmonaim period, in the middle of the Greek period. But then that is extinguished when Rome conquers the Greek Empire. And interestingly, right, the Vilna Gaon's reading of Jewish history is very, very close to the way medieval Jewish history unfolded. There were Jews living under what we would call Rome, Christendom, Western Europe. But then there are a lot of Jews in the Middle Ages who live under Yishmael, who live under the Muslims. And he has a place in his narrative of Jewish history here for both empires, both for Jews living under Rome, as well as Jews living under Yishmael. And then, according to the Vilna Gaon, the end of the song turns to messianic dreams, right? To dreams of a better time. We have the Shochet, who's coming and is going to kill the ox. He's going to wipe out Malchut Ishmael, the kingdom of the Muslims. That, he says, is Mashiach ben Yosef, a character which we can have another shiur about once to see how he's interpreted in Jewish history. But he's a character in the Messianic drama who's a military fighter, but he's the failed Messiah. He's the Messiah who actually dies in battle. He's killed in battle. And then comes the Malach HaMavet, who's going to kill Mashiach ben Yosef. But, right, if we wait long enough, Jewish history will have a happy ending when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God literally, will come and destroy the Malach HaMavet, the powers of evil, and have set a process of repair, leaving the Beit HaMikdash, the Gedi, intact again, with the possibility of the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. So the first two columns in the chart present two different readings, historical readings of Chad Gadya, that what we're talking about are the rise and fall of empires, and we're talking about either, according to Rav Yonatan Eibeshitz, the emphasis is on the eternal survival of Chad Gadya, that one little goat, Am Yisrael, which manages to survive from when Avraham Avinu set us in place, but until, right, the end of time, when God will ultimately, right, have settled scores with all of our enemies and brought us to redemption. According to the Vilna Gaon, the historical narrative that we're telling here focuses with the focus on the Beit HaMikdash, not Am Yisrael. We once had a temple, we say. That's the focus of the song. But then came empire after empire after empire. We did have that glorious moment of the Chashmonaim and the Chanukah story, soon to be wiped out and destroyed by the Romans. And then after the Romans, if that wasn't bad enough, when our temple was destroyed, then we have the Muslims, right? And maybe the connection of Ishmael, Muslims, to the temple is maybe the building of the mosque, right, in the 7th century here in Jerusalem. And then the song turns to dreaming of the future, a time when God will settle accounts with our final enemies, with Rome and with Ishmael, and ultimately bring us Geulah. So according to those two historical readings, right, we could understand why this is a very appropriate way to end the Seder. Right? The Seder, which we've been focusing on, telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim and finding meaning. And we say, B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatza miMitzrayim. You have to feel as if you left Egypt in your telling of the story this year. Well, what a better way to close the night than Jews across time in different diasporas looking out their window and looking back on Jewish history and telling this tale of Jewish history, which is a tale of survival despite great odds. And it's a tale that has a happy ending and it has a redemption, just like Yetziat Mitzrayim in the night of Pesach. And it's a song of hope, right? It's a song that leaves us at the end of the Seder, not simply saying the statement of L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, maybe next year will be better, right? Jewish history will be better and more peaceful, and we can all be back in Israel. But it's a song that reminds us, right? You know, one empire came, rose and fell, the next one. God seems to be working us through a process, and hopefully, right, we're getting towards the end, and the true Geulah will come, and we can gain hope and confidence in the future Geulah because we told the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We told about one time of redemption. We told about one time when God intervened and saved us, and that should give us hope for the future. So those are historical readings of Chad Gadya. The Chatam Sofer, who wrote in the early 19th century, he reads the song very, very connected to talking about Pesach. This is not a song teaching us all about Jewish history. This is a song that has something to say about the night itself and the essence of the night, which is what we would be doing if we had a Beit HaMikdash. And that is, we'd be offering the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagigah. We'd be offering two different animals tonight, the Gedi, the goat, and we'd be offering our sacrifices. And he reads the whole song as speaking about both the accompanying mitzvot and laws connected to the sacrifices of the night, as well as, right, some of the details of how the night would unfold. So, for example, right, the 2 zuzim that the father purchases the goat with, those, he says, that's the money that we have to purchase the korban chagiga with. The shunra, the cat, he reads this etymologically. In shunra, he finds shira na'ah, pleasant song. And that's referring to the hallel that we have to sing when we would eat the korban pesach. And then comes the dog who bites the cat, right? What's that? He says, when the time of dog barking comes, which is chatzot, midnight, that's when the cat stops. That's when you have to stop eating the korban pesach, stop your hallel. That's the time to stop. The wood and the water, the wood and the fire, he said, are the wood and the fire on the mizbeach in temple times on which we would offer the sacrifice. The water is the water that the Kohanim in the temple would rinse their hands and their feet with every day. Then we have the Torah, the ox. That's the Korban Chagiga. Those are the shore, the oxen of the Korban Chagiga, who would come and they would drink the water in the Beit HaMikdash. There are midrashim about that and agadot about that. But then comes the shochet. Then all of Am Yisrael in the morning would come and slaughter the shore for the Korban Chagiga, the ox for the Korban Chagiga. Oy, and then comes Malach HaMavet. That's the not happy part of the song, right? That's when the angel of death, who he says is the agent of the kingdom of Edom, Rome, Christendom, Western Europe, and they come and slaughter Am Yisrael. So Am Yisrael has been described up till now as being completely allegiant, right? We have the mitzvah of the day, these 2 korbanot. We follow them throughout history. We perform them with the Hallel. We stop at the right hour. We burn it on the mizbeach. We even have the water for the Kohanim. The next morning we would offer the sacrifices. It all seems good, but then history is abrupted and the sacrifices come to a rupture and an abrupt end with the Malach HaMavet arriving. But then the song ends with hope. Right? God will come, La'atid lavo, in the future. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yig'al et Am Yisrael. God will come and redeem Am Yisrael. V'yachzir avodat Beit HaMikdash limkoma. And God will restore the temple worship. So according to the Chatam Sofer, we're not talking about the rise and fall of empires. We're talking about a song at the end of the night of the Seder, when we've done a lot of mitzvot at the Seder. We've eaten the matzah, we've had 4 cups of wine, we've told the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, we've sung the Hallel, but we're kind of missing at our Seder the meat, right? We're missing the main part of the evening, which in temple times would have been the centerpiece of Pesach, namely the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagiga. And so we end with a song, says the Chatam Sofer, that's supposed to kind of remind us of the essence of the night that we just missed out on. And the reason we missed out on it is, if we get to the end of the song, we'll know. Because everything was intact. We had our Beit HaMikdash and we had our Korbanot, and we had all of the ways of observing them correctly. But then, right, the Malach HaMavet came. The evil Roman Empire came, destroyed us, ended the possibility of us continuing our Korbanot. And now we're waiting for the final stanza of the song for God to come and get even with Malach HaMavet, knock him off, and then we'll be able to come back and do our worship correctly. So that's a different way to close the night. It's, yes, a message of hope, but it's also a framing and a perspective that tonight we've done so many mitzvot and the Seder's been so meaningful, except that it's important to realize that we're actually, right, missing the meat of the night. We're missing the korbanot of Pesach. And the korbanot of Pesach we describe here, right, came with so many halachot and we performed them until a time in history when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed and we were attacked by the Malach HaMavet. And what we're waiting for at the end of the night is that hope. So all of the readings obviously end with hope because that's the theme at the end of the Seder. Question is, what's the focus before that? In the fourth column, I brought a Hasidic interpretation from the late 19th, early 20th century. Very, very different than any of the three previous explanations. And then we'll look at some of Rabbi Sachs's interpretations. In this interpretation, in the last column here, right, like many Hasidic interpretations, the theme and the message is about how we worship God, about our avodat Hashem. And the star of the song, the Gadya, the Gedi, the goat, is part of our worshiping God. The Gedi, which is, if you take the gematria of Gedi, 18, right, that refers to our Tfilat Shmona Esrei, the 18 blessings in our Tfilah. And it also refers to Chai, which is like the Torah. Okay, so that refers to our avodat Hashem, or some of our tefillah. The father that bought that for us, or the father that gifted that to us, that's God. The father is Hashem. So we had the father being Avram, we had the father being David. Chatzam Sofer didn't have a father in the story. Here, Hashem, who gave us the opportunity to serve him through the two zuzim, and he again goes to gematria, zuz plus zuz adds up to 40, 20 and 20. So where do we have 40? 40 is how many days Moshe spent on, right? Who knows 40? 40 is how many days Moshe spent on Mount Sinai receiving the Torah. But 40 can also be, without going into the greater interpretation, 40, he suggests, can also be a theme related to prayer, to tefillah. So the main character of the song, the Gedi, here refers to how we serve God through tefillah and through Torah. And then come all the bad guys of the song. The cat, the dog, the stick, the fire, the water. And they come, well, actually, not the fire. He leaves the fire in the good guys. But first we have some of the bad guys who come to interfere with our Gadya, with our main character, which is our avodat Hashem, through tefillah and through Torah. And who are the bad guys? The cat, he says, represents forgetfulness. That's based on various statements in Chazal about cats and forgetfulness. The dog represents brazenness, chutzpah. These are traits in the world and that interfere with individual Jews in their avodat Hashem. And then comes the chut ra, which he says is like the chet ra, the stick. It's like the process that sometimes by lapsing in our connection to God, the shichacha, and sometimes through chutzpah, we can actually then, the next step is to become sinners. And so in this mashal here, in this parable, which reads the song as the tale of the Jew, right? This is a classic Hasidic interpretation of the Pintel Yid, of the little good Jew who's trying to worship God, right? All he wants to do is have a life of tefillah and Torah. But then these evil forces get in the way. Forgetfulness, brazenness, sin. But then there's hope. Then you can bring the fire. The fire is the passion of avodat Hashem. We can relight and reignite the connection and the commitment to God. And then we can bring back, then the water comes to extinguish the fire. That's tefillah. And then the ox comes and drinks the water. That, he says, is the Torah. So our little Gedi, who began trying to live a life connected to Torah and tefillah, was interfered, but then can regain the passion and recommit to a life of tefillah and Torah. But then comes the shochet. The shochet, he says, is the midah of tzviut, of hypocrisy. Because sometimes even when we do return to avodat Hashem, There's a degree of insincerity and something potentially hypocritical. And then comes Malach HaMavet, which kind of can shake us up and remind us of what's essential and what's true and honest. And he says that when someone focuses and remembers that all human beings are mortal and they're not going to live forever, then that can bring the person to a more straight and correct and proper avodat Hashem. And of course, at the end of the process comes God and wipes out hypocrisy and imperfect worship of God. Because when Hashem is clear to us that Hashem is clearly in our lives, then our avodat Hashem is without any interference and hypocrisy. Now, this is so different than the historical readings. Here in a classic Hasidic reading, right, he's talking to his Hasidim, who are probably very simple people who have quite a lot of burdens of Olam Hazeh on their shoulders. And he's trying to give them some encouragement in their avodat Hashem. And for him, of course, how does the Seder end? It tells you how to be a good Jew. You're trying to be a good Jew. You're trying to have your tefillah and your Torah and your avodat Hashem at the center, but you have pulls and forces that are leading you astray, but then you can get back on track. You can reignite that passion and fire. But then sometimes there's a certain hypocrisy and dishonesty in your avodat Hashem, but that's okay, right? Just remember, you're mortal, you have God in the picture, and you'll get back on track. So he reads Chad Gadya, not necessarily as the culmination of this evening. It would probably be a good song to sing at the end of every day, right? He would say, right, to help you keep your focus on your true essence. So what we've seen are 4 examples, again, of the tens of examples of how you can read this same song so differently. You can read it as a historical tale of the rise and fall of the foes of the Jewish people or of the enemies of the Beit HaMikdash. And of course, both of those tales end with hopeful, wishful thinking, dreaming ahead of a time when God will come and settle accounts and bring us peace and redemption. You can read it like the Chatam Sofer did, that here at the end of the Seder, our focus is on what we didn't have yet in the evening, and that's the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagiga, because we have no Beit HaMikdash, but we can describe here with great excitement how it would have been and how it was, but then what went wrong, which was the Malach HaMavet, and Rome came and interfered and destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. But there's hope, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu can come and restore. And then the 4th Hasidic reading that we brought was a reading not connected so much to Pesach, but about the individual Jews, Avodat Hashem, and how the song gives the little simple Jew, right, the hope that their Avodat Hashem can become purer and straightened out. Rabbi Sachs in this piece, and we're not going to read the whole piece, ties together a lot of what we saw, and he offers several different readings of Chad Gadya. The first reading, he brings that Mishnah in Pirkei Avot about the skull and about the cycle of punishment that we saw above. And there, here in the 4th line, he suggests one reading. The theme is the destructive cycle of vengeance and retaliation. On one interpretation, the kid is Israel, the father who brought it. Here we've seen some of this, right? The rise and fall of empires. And he suggests he even continues the rise and fall of empires into the 20th century. And he says, right, the song concludes with an expression of faith, that Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass, and the Jewish people will return to its land. So has it been in our days. So that's one reading. A second reading, right, he brings the midrash that we saw in Bava Batra from above. And then he says that could be connected with yet another midrash. That was the midrash that we saw was the one that ended with emet me'eretz titzmach, right? That truth is what can ultimately knock off all of the things that were on that long list of what seemed to be very strong and very powerful items in the world. And when Rabbi Sachs contemplates on that midrash, sorry, just going back here, he says, this remarkable remarkable midrash turns the fundamental problem of faith upside down. The question is not, given the nature of the world, how can God exist? But rather, given the nature of God, how can the world exist? How could God, who creates in love, bring into being a creature, man, who destroys in hate? How, having made the universe, could God create the one being capable of destroying it? And he says, the Midrash gives an answer. God took truth and threw it to the ground, saying, Emet me'eretz titzmach, let truth grow from the earth. Human beings cannot stand exposure to too much truth. Reality is too awesome for us to see it steadily and whole. Therefore, God proposes that man suffice with truth as it is on earth, not as it is on heaven. We see fragments of the divine presence, but no more. And the challenge is, right, for us to be able to bring truth out of the earth. And he brings some other examples. And then, right here at the end, right, he ties things together with a quote from Sir Henry Sumner Maine, who I'm not familiar with, who once said, war appears to be as old as mankind, but peace is a modern innovation. And Rabbi Sachs says that he was wrong, because our prophets, our Nevi'im, spoke about peace a long time ago as a world ideal. Right? And he quotes Yeshayahu, Lo yisa goy el goy cherev, v'lo yilmedu od milchama, that our real dream is a time when we won't need successful armies, but we'll live in a time of peace. And right, the time that Yeshayahu describes that God will eradicate death forever. And now Rabbi Sachs connects it to the end of the Seder. So having earlier expressed the Jewish hope, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, we end the Seder night with the universal hope that the angel of death will one day be defeated by the long overdue realization that God is about life, that worshiping God means sanctifying life, that God's greatest command is uvacharta b'chayim, choose life, that we bring God into the world by reciting a blessing over life. And he ends, I think, on a very beautiful note. I find it almost unbearably moving that a people that has known so much suffering can summon the moral courage to end this evening of Jewish history on a supreme note of hope and write it into the hearts of its children in the form of a nursery rhyme, a song. For what we give our children on this night of nights is something more and greater than the bread of oppression and the taste of Jewish tears. It is a faith that in this world, with all its violence and cruelty, we can create moments of redemption, signals of transcendence, acts of transfiguring grace. No people has risked and suffered more for a slender hope, but no hope has lifted a people higher and led it time and time again to greatness. So we end the night with a prayer and conviction. The prayer, God of life, help us win a victory over the forces of death. And the conviction that by refusing to accept the world that is, together we can start to make the world that ought to be. And I think that there couldn't be a better message to go into Pesach with. We can hope that by the time we get to singing Chad Gadya at our Seder in a week and a half, maybe some more forces of evil will have been put down, and some of the evil that unfortunately we've all been living with in the last year and a half will already be eradicated. But the Chad Gadya message that Rav Sachs wants us to take home is that we have to remember what our real focus is, right? Our real focus is like the prophecy of Yeshayahu, that we want to live in a time when evil is eradicated and when everybody's living at peace with each other. And that's a very powerful message that we convey through this nursery rhyme style song at the end of the Seder. We don't convey it in deep philosophic statements. We convey it in a way, right, that everybody can access that message. So that is a hope and a prayer for going into Pesach.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments? I think there's one or two comments in the chat box. If you want to take a quick look.
I see, right? So absolutely, these songs could have been to keep people up, right? But the content of the songs, right, is a choice. And the content of the songs is to give us hope and to leave us at the end of the Seder with much more than just the statement, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, but all of these songs of hope that infuse us that, hey, it's really coming. I can see myself right in that process.
All right. Anything else? Do I see your parents online?
Yes, they are.
Oh, very nice. Always nice when parents come and learn Torah with their children. A beautiful, beautiful zchut. So nice. I don't know if we've ever met, but anyways, thank you. Okay, Rabbi Shulman will be at 1 p.m. That's an hour from now, just over an hour from now, on the sages of Bnei Brak, their timeless message of hope, sort of what you said at the last line. And tomorrow, Aaron Kohler will be at 11 a.m. and Yosef Rubel at 1 p.m. You can take a look at the full schedule like every day. So forward to learning with you. Please invite a friend to come. And Dafna, thank you very much. Chag Sameach
Pleasure.
and all the
Chag
best.
Sameach.
Thank
Okay.
you so
Bye-bye.
much. It was so beautiful. I can't wait to give this over at the Seder. Never did I ever say anything about Chad Gadya. Everybody's falling asleep. But
You can also say it at lunch or on Shabbat lunch. And
say it at night. I think it's great. Thank you. It was
My
really
pleasure.
staying home and listening to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Dafna is always great.
Thank you.
Hi,
Sarah.
Charlie and Gita.
Thanks.
Okay. Hope to see everybody
Bye.
soon. Be well. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Both of everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.